Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm your host, Jim Chapman, and we are continuing with part 2 of the Exposed Investigates Blue on Blue two-part series, which covers the cop-on-cop shooting of Kelsey Fitzsimmons. So if you have not heard part 1, go check that out. Go listen to it so you'll be caught up, and we're going to again pick up where I left off last week. Now, when I left you last, Kelsey had been airlifted to the hospital. She had to undergo, incidentally, 5 surgeries within this time inside of the hospital. And while she's doing that, Justin, her fiance, he allegedly figured, hey, that would be a good time to break into her house, steal her laptop, some other things, and that's where I left off last episode. So picking up, according to reports, allegedly, he gets that laptop and he goes back to his house, meaning Justin. And we know he had it because allegedly he connects to the internet at his home. And when you do that, guess what? There's a track record of that. The IP address is going to show up somewhere. And she is in the hospital this whole time fighting for her life. Now, a few of the other things Justin allegedly did. He allegedly accessed her Facebook and Gmail accounts, accessed her bank accounts, withdrew approximately $5,000. He also accessed her medical records, allegedly, and the beneficiary information to her life insurance. He also canceled travel reservations that she had already paid for and then redirected those funds into his own account. Now, after doing all of this, he returns that laptop to her home, and Kelsey is still hospitalized at this point. And I'm only speculating here, but he probably realized, oh shit, she's going to live, and I've got her laptop at my house, and so now I have to go return that. Because I can tell you, initially, he probably, like everybody else, wasn't so sure she was going to make it. It was very bad for her, critical. And that's just my speculation, but it's the only thing that makes sense to me as to why he would return that laptop back to her house. So all told, Kelsey Fitzsimmons spends 53 days in the hospital recovering. And what is really crazy to me is that during her stay, while she is still in the hospital, Massachusetts State Police show up. And this girl at this point is far from being released from the hospital, y'all. It's really only clear at this point that she was going to live. She was still on a long road to recovery. They go to her hospital bed, mind you, and they arrest her. Now, they don't take her away and handcuff her and bring her to jail because she's in bad freaking shape. But they do arraign her, if you will, right there on the spot in her hospital bed in what is, in my opinion, at this point in the investigation, a very questionable case. And we'll get into that later on. But I want you to listen to this clip.
Hi, Kelsey. Hi. My name's David. I'm with the Mass State Police. I'm a sergeant with the DA's office, and this is Cam Ortiz. And just so you know, I have a body cam on. And so unfortunately, we have the police under arrest today. We're gonna call your attorney so he knows.
Okay.
And then we're gonna try to get you arraigned as soon as possible.
Okay.
All right. I'm sorry this is kind of a shock, but.
What about the test tubes?
Something's gonna
Not going anywhere.
Yeah, you're staying here. You're gonna get arraigned from your bed. All right. Either we're gonna do it from my laptop. I don't know. The tin might come down here. Might do it with my cell phone, but.
Okay.
All right.
So she is arrested, theoretically, but she's still in that hospital bed. And while she is recovering, a grand jury is convened on charges of assault to commit murder against Officer Noonan. So from her hospital bed, this is on July 17th of 2025, she does release a statement, and it is extremely important. This is a little bit lengthy, but it's extremely important that you hear this. It starts, "My name is Kelsey Fitzsimmons, and as I recover in my hospital bed, I'm ready to speak about the incident that took place on June 30th, 2025 in my own home where I almost lost my life. I was diagnosed with postpartum depression in March of 2025, approximately 3 weeks after giving birth to my beautiful baby boy. I have actively been in treatment since the day of my diagnosis and was eager to heal and feel like myself again. Unfortunately, a sickness does not happen overnight. However, what can happen overnight is my life turning upside down into something so horrible my mind wouldn't be able to imagine it if it weren't my current reality. Someone who I thought understood my diagnosis, loved me in sickness and in health, and was in my corner for my journey of my active treatment to get better, turned their back on me. Said person is now legally bullying me to get what they want, slandering my character, and using my diagnosis against me to make me seem like I am a monster. There are more false allegations than I can even comment on. The deep love I have for my baby boy sustains me and keeps me strong. I haven't spent more than a night away from him since I delivered him, and I adore every moment I spend with him. He's my best friend, my miracle, my little man, my sweet boy, and most importantly, a giant piece of my heart. Right now, that piece of my heart is missing when I need it the most. I'm 5 months postpartum without my baby boy who needs me as much as I need him. I would never put that angel of a child in harm's way. My job as his mama is to protect him, and that is what I've always done and will continue to do for the rest of my life. Becoming a mother has always been my dream, and I never made any threats toward my baby. That allegation specifically makes me sick to my stomach. I was alone with my baby day in and day out for months caring for him, as my fiance frequently worked 24 to 48 hour shifts, but conveniently there were never any concerns up until now. On June 30th, 2025, I received a phone call from my fiance to meet him at the park to go for a walk with our baby boy together. After almost 3 hours of waiting for him in the park and no communication from him, I went home very confused as he never showed up. About an hour later, I'm sitting on my couch feeding my baby boy when I got a knock on the front door. Very confused to see 3 of my colleagues. I open that door and I am told the following: "Your fiance has filed a restraining order against you. He will be taking your son away with no contact allowed. Your firearms license that was just returned is gone again. And, oh yeah, that career you worked so hard for and love that you were just cleared to return to, that will be taken away too." Following this interaction, I packed my bags containing baby food, clothes, diapers, toys, etc. for my son to be taken away from me. I passed my son off to a fellow officer and I went into my bedroom. In that horrible moment, I did not want to live after my whole world was turned upside down. In a matter of a 10-second conversation due to someone alleging horrible, untrue things. We have a broken legal system where anyone can walk into a courthouse, write anything that self-serves them on an affidavit, and as a result, a brand new mother suffering with postpartum depression gets her baby taken away. We are calling on legislature and the governor to reform this abomination of a statute where the first person to get to court and fill out a form can take a mother's newborn away from her if they can sneak it in front of a judge without the mother's notice or opportunity to be heard. If there's an immediate issue, someone can call 911. The courts are not equipped for proper on-the-spot decision-making in this context without a hearing for both sides. As a police officer, I am trained to know what to do if I encounter a suicidal individual who is only displaying a threat to themselves. I am certainly not trained to shoot a suicidal person in the chest. But here I am today, 2 surgeries later, bedridden and trying really hard to deal with these significant injuries. I am facing felony charges for a half-hearted attempt to take my own life. Let me say that again. I am in trouble and have a gunshot wound to my chest because in that awful isolated moment, I no longer had the will to live. I never pointed my firearm at that officer. That officer was not just a colleague, he was my friend. That officer and I experienced very difficult and sad call together last summer. That call for service that day was a true tragedy and caused this officer and I to build a friendship due to experiencing it together. We entered a home and walked into something no human being should ever see, a murder-suicide scene with a mother and infant. As a rookie police officer, this was devastating to me. At the time, I was 20 weeks pregnant. The officer that shot me experienced this call with me. To this day, his support during that hard time is something I'm still grateful for, regardless of this recent incident that occurred. This traumatic murder-suicide call was a catalyst for my mental health complications. As a police officer myself, I would never even think to intentionally hurt another police officer. I see everyone in uniform as my brothers and sisters. I especially would never hurt a friend, my friend who has a loving wife and children. I just would never. My firearm was never pointed in any direction other than my temple. When I pulled the trigger, my gun did not fire. However, I immediately got shot in the chest by my colleague and friend. I'm extremely grateful for two things: that God protected me from my attempt from taking my own life and protected me by millimeters from dying from that gunshot wound in my chest. I will survive and thrive. I know I need to be on this earth for many reasons, but most importantly, my beautiful son. This is my covenant with God and my son. I would also like to note that from the very beginning, I acknowledged my diagnosis of postpartum depression and immediately sought help from medical professionals. I was failed by so many. The narrative that has been released by NAPD is vague and non-committal for a reason. If body cameras were worn by my department, I would not be in a position where I am wrongly accused of pointing a gun at another officer. I know the truth will prevail. Kelsey Fitzsimmons. And that was her statement. She brings up a lot of good points. None more obvious than no body cameras. And look, a lot of departments don't wear body cameras for whatever reason, but this is certainly a case for the promotion of body cameras, because a body camera don't lie. But back to it. The grand jury, as I told you, convened, and they returned what's known as a no true bill indictment, meaning that grand jury, they didn't feel like there was enough evidence to charge Kelsey with assault to commit murder. And keep that in mind. Look, it's not hard to get an indictment because a defense is not allowed to produce a defense to a grand jury. All that happens in a grand jury indictment is the prosecution goes and they say, this is our evidence, and based off of this evidence, do you think there's enough evidence to convict? And a grand jury, which meets in secret, decides that. They either do a true bill indictment or a no true bill indictment. In this case, they said, guess what? There ain't enough evidence here to convict this girl of pointing a gun at this officer. But rather than back off at that point, meaning the prosecution and the district attorney's office specifically, they just lower the charges to assault. And the reason that they do that is there's not as high a burden of evidence to convict someone of assault. Assault only carries a 5-year prison sentence. So they lower the charges, they re-show this evidence, and they're able to get an indictment on that. So on August 28th, Kelsey, who was just recently released from the hospital, she gets arraigned and she pleads not guilty to these charges. Now, the judge that we're going to talk about for a second, her name is Judge McCarthy Naaman, and she allows Kelsey to be released under house arrest. And there were some other requirements that she had to have while she was waiting for her trial. One of those was she was not allowed to drink alcohol, and she had to submit to what's known as a scram alcohol test. And it's basically a machine that you breathe into, and you can't just breathe like you breathe naturally. You've got to take deep breaths and breathe into this thing, and it reads out an alcohol level. And you have to do this so many times per day. The problem was, keep in mind, this girl was shot in the chest and the bullet punctured her lung. She just got out of the hospital. You reckon it might be pretty painful to breathe into this thing several hours per day or whatever it was? Well, it certainly was painful, and her attorneys, they do the right thing. They go to court and they make some requests. And I want you to listen to this next clip because it speaks volumes about what is, in my opinion, some malicious prosecution going on here and what the judge is doing. And she appears to have it out for Kelsey in a pretty personal way. This is from the hearing where her attorneys, they're requesting another option to that scram machine in a motion. Listen to this.
So I received a defendant's emergency motion for immediate release from the Scram order. So I'll hear from the moving party.
Thank you so much, Your Honor. Judge, this is an issue that causes Ms. Fitsimmons a lot of pain. And I don't want to conflate her being able to pass the test, because she's been passing them, but she has about 4 hours of pain and dizziness afterwards. And you know, I don't think anyone, and I know the court would share my thought, that this shouldn't be a torture device for her. This shouldn't be something that causes her pain, impairs her rib healing, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, we're not trying to get any sort of advantage over anything. We just want her to not be in pain for hours after these tests, and B, you know, we just want her to not have the anxiety that if she has a difficulty doing it, that she's going to get a knock on the door and get locked up. You have Mr. January's email regarding his own observations about what happened.
And incidentally, y'all, Mr. January is Kelsey's probation officer. So we continue.
And, you know, I think that says it all. That's someone that has no bias or interest, and, you know, probation enforces court orders, and that's that. And he's telling the court this is a problem.
Okay, so you're asking the court to adjust the court's order that's been in effect for 3 days with no medical evidence to support your claim that she cannot do it.
Well, I think you have 2 affidavits and the email from probation. I think that's pretty persuasive evidence that this is extremely difficult.
The email from probation is not evidence. If you have any evidence, now is your opportunity to submit it.
I don't understand the court's position. That's not evidence.
Okay, it's an email. It's hearsay. Commonwealth, do you have a position as to the submissions of an email as evidence in this hearing to relieve the defendant, Ms. Fitsimmons, of a condition that's been in effect for 3 days?
I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but we have the person who sent that email here.
Okay. So you have a burden. It's your motion. What do you want to do?
Well, Judge, I don't think that is the court saying that papers and emails and affidavits are not sufficient?
This is an email from a probation officer. The court gives that 0 weight.
Well, then you have an affidavit from Ms. Fitsimmons, and you have an affidavit from her mother of the physical observations of what happens. You know, I think it's self-evident and it's common knowledge that if you have broken ribs, that it's hard to breathe.
What evidence do I have that she has current broken ribs and that she's suffering from broken ribs at this time?
Well, you have an affidavit from her mother. You have an affidavit from Ms. Fitsimmons. And the other day we were here, I submitted the instructions from Mass General about broken ribs.
Okay.
You know, she's having great difficulty here. It's been observed by probation. It's been attested to by her mother, and it's been attested to by Ms. Fitsimmons. So it's just a very difficult scenario for her.
So at this point, the probation officer, Mr. January, he gets up and he tries to reason with this judge.
She answered the alert to take the test as scheduled. Unfortunately, she was unable to complete the test because she was unable to blow as long or as hard as needed to complete the test. So we also know that, and I observed it firsthand, that whatever the injuries are, which I don't know, actually doesn't really matter to me. But when I was doing the installation process and observed what was genuine pain, like genuine pain. So
any objection to any of the terms used by the probation officer? Okay.
So, and she ultimately passes the test. That's compliance. If she has missed the test, and then that would determine whether or not there's actual non-compliance. This particular case, I don't deem non-compliance because she's complying with the scheduled program. I'm aware of pain based on my observations from the installation process. So as long as she's attempting to take the test, continues to attempt to take the test, and then ultimately takes the test, that's not non-compliance. That's someone that's,
well, that's your position that's non-compliant.
Well,
it's really up to the court to decide whether somebody's compliant or not with conditions of release.
It would never be brought to court by way of a pretrial violation for an incomplete test with the information that I've talked about. So, no, an incomplete test does not initiate a pretrial violation or from our end,
Right.
because there are many reasons for a test to be incomplete. That's not intentional non-compliance. And the goal is to test to ensure that the person's sober, and we don't deem that non-compliance. And we never have, and we never would in this case.
Attorney Boyle, do you have anything else to submit?
Judge, I would just offer, I respect and I've heard Your Honor's take on the probation email, but for the record, I would move that into evidence as well. And I just want to also...
Commonwealth, do you have a position as to the admission of the email?
I think we just heard with the email.
All right, so the email is excluded. Anything else, Attorney
No,
Boyle?
my objection, Your Honor.
Sure.
I just want to clarify something. My email, and I know but it's important that the court knows I didn't make a recommendation that a scram condition be vacated. I never did that. I never suggested. It's all that email was.
Attorney, Officer January, nobody's asking you questions. Your testimony is complete. Are you asking to make a statement to the court sua sponte?
If the court's under the belief that I recommended that condition be vacated or removed, then yeah.
I haven't said anything one way or the other, sir. We're here for one purpose and one purpose
Okay.
only, and that's for the motion to vacate the scram device. So Ms. Fitsimmons is able to do the scram. Is that correct? Or is she not able to do it? I don't know. Is she not able to do it?
That depends on whether the court is willing to tolerate that the material represented in the
court is not tolerating anything. Okay, let's be clear. I'm not tolerating anything. The court is not tolerating anything. Ms. Fitsimmons is a defendant. In lieu of incarceration, my order was that she submit to scram. If she cannot do that, I need to know that. Can she do that or not?
She can do it.
Okay.
Under the terms that are laid out in the affidavit.
So you're saying she can do it on her own terms?
With significant pain and dizziness and having to recover for several hours.
I understand what you're saying. It is certainly not the court's intention. It's not the court's position to have Ms. Fitzsimmons in any pain at all. So I appreciate your argument. Do you have anything else to add?
I would suggest, Judge, that I think there's other ways to do this. If the court wishes to have her tested for lack of alcohol, that's completely fine with the defense. But just the means that's being employed is kind of a torture device for her.
Okay.
And so we object on due process grounds to that.
Oh, okay.
But
it is not this court's intention
I understand
to torture Ms. Fitzsimmons at all. The court's goal is to make sure the community is safe and Officer Noonan is safe. So I hear you loud and clear that the defense views Ms. Fitzsimmons having to do the scram as cruel and unusual and torture. Is that your position?
Well, that's an Eighth Amendment position. I suppose that can be put in there as well. But Judge, I think that, there's probably other alternatives that she could do that I believe are out there. But I know that might step on the court's other order for house arrest, that you would have to go to a facility. I know there's like urine tests and other things like that. So I know there's other possibilities out there that, again, she's not trying to use this to create a situation where she can go drink alcohol.
Okay.
That's not at all what this is about. So I just want to ask the court to consider any other alternatives that might not pose this type of an issue.
Okay.
Thank you.
Attorney Gubitosi or Attorney Moriarty, do you have anything to add?
No.
Okay, I'm going to leave the bench for a few minutes.
So she takes a recess, and can y'all hear the disdain in the voice of this judge? The absolute disregard completely for the situation at hand. This judge is pissed at everyone by this point, including that probation officer. So she comes back from that recess, and her ruling is absolutely shocking. And keep in mind, y'all, all they're asking her to come up with is another means to check the alcohol content rather than using that machine that Kelsey has to breathe in because it's so painful and she's recovering from a freaking collapsed lung. That is not too much to ask for. But listen to this.
Your Honor, we're back on the record with the Fitsimmons matter.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So I have reviewed everything again that's been submitted to me. And I will state for the record that Fitsimmons has moved twice in a 3-day period to amend her conditions of release. Just days ago, the court concluded that the condition of remaining alcohol-free and submitting to scrim monitoring was necessary to ensure the safety of the community. After a thorough review of all of the arguments and submissions by the Commonwealth and Fitsimmons, that conclusion remains unchanged, regardless of Fitsimmons' claimed physical limitations. Based on an affidavit submitted by Fitsimmons' mother, the testimony of Assistant Chief Probation Officer Jeff January about his observations of Fitsimmons' apparent pain during the scrim installation, and the representations of Fitsimmons' counsel that it would be cruel and unusual punishment and torture to continue to require Fitsimmons to comply with the condition of being monitored by scrim, the court concludes that Fitsimmons cannot abide by the condition of being monitored by scrim. Without this condition, which ensures that she does not consume any alcohol, the court cannot assure the safety of Officer Noonan and all other persons in the community. Accordingly, the court's prior order of release is vacated, and Fitsimmons is ordered to be held without bail pursuant to Mass General Laws, Chapter 276, Section 58A. And a written order for
May I
follow.
address the court?
That's the court's order. Thank you.
All right.
All right, Jack, I ask you to stay your order pending the SJC. And there are other alternatives Your Honor can cause.
Now, you just heard that, right? This girl goes into that hearing to try to get another option to test her blood alcohol level. And even her probation officer testifies on her behalf. And the judge has such an axe to grind for some reason that rather than seek another alternative, she throws this girl in jail who nearly died awaiting trial. So her attorney is like, fuck that. He's prepared what is known as an emergency writ, which is basically an appeal to the appeals court that appeals that judge's decision. And I'm going to read to you a short aspect of that appeal. It reads, Miss Kelsey Fitzsimmons, a North Andover police officer and former corrections officer, was out on release from Essex Superior Court on pretrial conditions. Miss Fitzsimmons came back to court on her own motion through counsel after she was unable to blow into a scram alcohol monitoring device deeply enough due to her sustaining a gunshot wound to the chest. She had a collapsed lung, broken ribs, diaphragm, and liver damage requiring 53 days in the hospital. Counsel expected a short hearing where the defense reported the difficulties and had an alternative method of alcohol testing put in place. Instead, a completely improper nightmare scenario ensued. Rather than utilizing readily available alternative methods of alcohol testing, the court surrendered the petitioner back in jail without a legal basis to do so, either from the Commonwealth or probation. She berated and shut down the probation officer, cut off counsel, walked off the bench while the undersigned was arguing for his client. In writing, she accused the defense of manipulating the situation and repeatedly misstated the record. Ms. Fitzsimmons respectively asked the single justice to review the full audio of the hearing and vacate the trial court order. And then it goes into her request. She basically is looking for just what she was looking for in the first hearing, an alternative method to this breathing into this machine. The alcohol testing device ordered by the court requires the petitioner to blow intensely into an attached tube several scheduled times per day. After attempting to use the device, Ms. Fitzsimmons, in good faith, returned promptly to court to report she could not use the device without great pain and dizziness for up to 4 hours, and it aggravated the healing of broken ribs. Pain notwithstanding, she tried and immediately passed 8 out of the 9 tests. And when she called the monitoring authority on the remaining incomplete tests, after increasing breathing difficulty, she was told they may issue a warrant. They did not. Between the physical pain and anxiety of a warrant issuing, causing her to be arrested, to be taken to jail again, despite her good faith attempts, Ms. Fitzsimmons, through counsel, returned to court right away of her own accord. At the hearing, the probation officer testified, and I'm not going to go into all that because you already heard clips of that hearing, but it goes into everything that you heard in that clip. And it says the undisputed facts of the case are Ms. Fitzsimmons is approximately 5'3", 110 pounds, was shot in the chest by a colleague, and this order required her to surrender her 5-month-old child, and kind of goes into the whole cusp of this case, if you will. It mentions that she was diagnosed with postpartum depression and kind of went into how she was shot by this officer. It ends up with there was no intent to murder, no malice, no evil intent, only suicidal desperation and danger by the postpartum depression, a scenario that cannot justify a judicial declaration that Ms. Fitzsimmons, a police officer, must be locked up with no possible alternative as a danger to society and to the armed and trained police officer that almost killed her. The trial court's order is as heartless as it is legally baseless and must be reversed. So get this, while the appeal is being considered, it also comes out shortly after this hearing that the judge actually met with the probation office, not that particular officer, but went to the probation office itself, allegedly, 24 hours prior to this hearing to get information on this case with Kelsey Fitzsimmons. And that is a huge ethics violation for a judge. You're only allowed to consider evidence presented to you. In court, ethically, you're not supposed to do that. Well, others would agree with that, and they would also agree that this judgment to put Kelsey back in jail was the wrong call. And this judge actually gets removed from the case over this. And another judge presides over the trial aspect of Kelsey's case. And incidentally, Kelsey did get out of jail once this occurred, pending her trial. So in late July of 2026, everything I just covered in these 2 episodes comes out as Kelsey Fitzsimmons' trial starts. And this was not a jury trial. It was a judge trial, meaning the judge presided over it, and he made the decision regarding guilt or innocence. The judge only. He is essentially the only juror in this instance. And shout out to that judge who I felt was very fair and very impartial. So all the evidence is presented that I covered with you, and the judge rules on this case. And I want you to listen to the clip of his ruling.
I understand that this case has generated a lot of passion and emotion. But you must remember that this is a courtroom and not a sports arena. When I announce my verdict, we must not act out emotionally or visibly or audibly react. So you should leave the courtroom if you believe that you will be unable to maintain your composure. I'd like to start with a few introductory words. Let me say this, this is not in my script. This has been one of the more exhausting, hardest things I've had to do as a judge, as an attorney. And so, as some lawyers know, unlike when a judge presides over a jury rape trial in a civil case, there is no requirement that a judge explain their reasons for reaching a verdict after a criminal bench trial. I do so in this case because I think that Ms. Fitsimmons, Officer Noonan, and all the people involved in the traffic events of June 30, 2025 deserve an explanation. Next, I'd like to take the opportunity to publicly thank and commend the attorneys in this case. They all did an exceptional job presenting the evidence and conducting themselves in an extremely professional and civil manner. And they did so under the public spotlight in an emotionally charged case. I commend you. To the extent that any of the prosecutors and attorneys may be vilified or subjected to public scorn for simply doing their jobs, in this case, I say that any such scorn is unfair, unwarranted, and simply wrong. These prosecutors and attorneys fought hard but performed their solid jobs fairly with the utmost civility, and professionalism. They served as a shining example of our adversarial system in operation. Now, I'd like to publicly acknowledge the crucial and often thankless role that police officers perform, a role that Ms. Fitsimmons herself, like Officer Noonan, willingly and selflessly performed for the citizens of North Andover. For this, you should be thanked, not disparaged. For those that think that serving as a police officer is easy, or that officers don't care or take pride in their work, I say with more than 3 decades of experience in the criminal justice system that you are naive, misinformed, and sadly mistaken. The work of police officers is especially fraught with peril today because of our exceedingly cynical, polarized atmosphere where our citizenry often believes that there is a conspiracy under or around every corner. I saw no evidence of a conspiracy in this case. What I saw was dedicated public servants like Officer Noonan and his fellow officers doing the best they could under tragic, rapidly evolving emotional circumstances. What I also saw was a young woman, Ms. Fitsimmons, who was also a dedicated public servant, reacting to sudden, confusing, and heartbreaking news. Now let me turn to the evidence and the law. Our system of justice requires me to decide this case solely on the law and the evidence. So the only things I considered in reaching my verdict are the 98 exhibits submitted during the trial and the testimony of the 11 witnesses that testified here in open court. While it may be cold and uncaring, our system of justice demands that emotion, sympathy, and concern for the consequences of my decision play no role in my decision. As for the law, in order to prove Ms. Fitsimmons guilty of the crime of assault by means of a dangerous weapon, the Commonwealth must prove the following 3 things. We lawyers call these things elements beyond a reasonable doubt. First, that Ms. Simmons committed an assault on Officer Noonan. Second, that Ms. Simmons intended to commit the assault. And third, that the assault was committed by means of a dangerous weapon. The sole issue before me is whether the Commonwealth proved each of these 3 elements beyond a reasonable doubt. And more specifically, under the circumstances of this case, the narrow issue before me is whether the Commonwealth proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Ms. Fitsimmons pointed a firearm at Officer Noonan for any perceptible amount of time. What is not before me are the legality of the issuance of the restraining order to Mr. Alain, the reasonableness of the procedure used by the police to serve the restraining, the legality of Officer Noonan's use of force, and issues regarding custody of Caden. It is not my place to decide these issues or even mention my thoughts on them. I am thankful for this because my role has been hard enough. What has made my job especially difficult in this case is that by and large, I found the testimony of Officer Noonan and Ms. Fitsimmons to be credible on the material and relevant points. In my experience, this is unusual and somewhat perplexing. On the one hand, Ms. Fitsimmons credibly testified that she never pointed a firearm at Officer Noonan. On the other hand, Officer Noonan testified that not only did Miss Fitsimmons point the gun at him, that she also pulled the trigger. Both agreed that it happened in seconds near a narrow doorway, and the crime scene photos show that the door frame was made narrower by a clothes rack containing police uniforms that was to Officer Noonan's left. The door frame was also made, the door frame was made still narrower when Officer Noonan used it to take cover when he threw his firearm. During the closing argument, the Commonwealth argued that it is scientifically and physically impossible for Ms. Fitsimmons' story to be true because there was a bullet in the chamber, and she said that Officer Noonan shot her without her ever wrapping the slide after pulling the trigger. I disagree that the evidence reflected that the only way the chamber around would have been to pull the slide under those circumstances. However, even if I assume that Ms. Fitsimmons lied about not wrapping the slide, it does not detract from the adequacy and credibility of her testimony that she never pointed the gun at Officer Noonan, about which he was equally as adamant that she did. Perhaps the Commonwealth could have easily met its burden if the officers had been wearing body cleaners. But under these circumstances, I am left with a reasonable doubt, and I am duty-bound to find that the Commonwealth has not met its burden of proof that Ms. Fitsimmons committed an assault by means of a dangerous weapon on Officer Noonan, and my verdict is, and must be, not guilty. With that, I will hand the signed verdict slip. Use it. I will hand the signed verdict slip to Mr. Noonan and ask that he advise Ms. Fitsimmons of her statutory rights. Ms. Fitsimmons, could you please stand?
So there you have it, not guilty. And what do I personally think happened in this case? Do I think this officer intentionally shot her with the intention of killing her? No, I don't. And that's just my personal opinion, my personal view. Yours may be different. And in my view, there's really two ways this could have went, because I do believe she was telling the truth, Kelsey Fitzsimmons. The first way is the officer went completely on autopilot the second she raised that gun to her head. And I think he went on autopilot because he had a stress reaction to this. What he thought was a gun coming up at him just wasn't. But because you've got to remember, these are split-second reactions, I think his mind saw what it saw. And I believe he probably fully believes everything he said and testified to. Now, the only other alternative to that is that he initially panicked, thought she was going to shoot him, even though she had the gun pointed at herself. It's just such a quick reaction. His mind probably did not have time to perceive where that gun exactly was in relation to him. And I think he panicked and shot her. That's a possibility. And realizing what he had done, and let's be honest, he probably assumed she wasn't going to live. He lied about it. Because you screw up like that, and you're going to end up in jail. That's homicide. But Kelsey lived through it, and that kind of threw a whole monkey wrench in that lie. And so the issue here is, when he lied, he's got to keep lying to keep his ass out of trouble. So it's one of those two things. And somewhere in his mind, he knows full well what happened, but he's got to live with that. I don't know. I have no direct knowledge. I wasn't there. So he's got to live with whatever really happened in that case, and I'm not so sure what it is. I'm more apt to believe this guy in his mind believes what he saw. At least I hope that's the case. But I will say that in my view, there is no world where this girl would have shot another cop. It just doesn't pass the smell test. It makes absolutely no sense. It's just not in her. There's nothing in her past that would be indicative of that. But I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on it, so let me know. Thank you so much for listening. That's going to wrap up this two-part series, Blue on Blue. I hope you enjoyed it. I put a lot of time into researching this one. Check out the Patreon. I'll have all kinds of stuff on this case dropping just for subscribers on that Patreon. It's patreon.com/exposed podcast files. We drop early releases, bonus episodes. We also do quarterly gifts for our top tier celebrity members. And I'd love to get your support on the Patreon page. Without those folks, I couldn't do this. I just could not do it. So thank you. I love each and every one of you. And until next time, for Exposed Scandalous Files of the Elite, I'm your host, Jim Chapman. Much love.